Again, my name's Daniel Summers. I'm the CEO and founding partner of a company called Electronic Lab Logs. Okay, and we are a SaaS company that helps labs ditch the paper logs. So that's our little tagline. And I'll explain what we mean by that. So if you're like me and you do not at all have a healthcare background, right? You might think of the lab like this picture of this nebulous, like what is really going on behind the curtain type thing, right? Because honestly, I had no clue. I really had no experience. And so I just knew there were a bunch of smart people running tests and they gave you results and then you got a big bill for it, right? That's all I knew about the lab world. And honestly, a lot of it is really sophisticated. So this is just a quick picture of like one of the more sophisticated automation lines. And this particular instrument, for example, does hundreds of tests in an hour, right? They'll just do all these little vials will go through, and it's crazy, crazy stuff the way it's automated. So in a lot of ways, it is very, very sophisticated, and they tie into really sophisticated systems that are electronic and all that. But what you may not realize is if you go around the corner of this automation line, you're going to see this, okay? These are actual paper logs that are in binders and clipboards hung on the side of all this equipment, right? So you're like, how does this happen, right? This is really going on in the lab, and it really is. So the reason why is you spend all this money on this expensive equipment, but you still have to track your maintenance and a lot of times your QC data on paper. It's just the way it's been done for years, okay? So think of it as like your tire rotations, your oil change on your car. You have to do certain things on this instrumentation to make sure it's performing correctly, okay? So your manufacturers give you these lists and you check them off daily. Sometimes you have results to write and it gets real scribbly and messy like what you saw before. So this is actually a costly issue for people, right? Sometimes they don't even realize it's a costly issue, but there's a lot of time wasted on the front end, right? And there's a lot of misses that happen. Sometimes they don't even know about it for days or weeks at a time. If somebody misses a test or a sensor goes bad and they don't tell the right person, they have no idea. But then there's a whole lot of time wasted on the back end. Okay, so at the end of the month, for example, if I'm in charge of the chemistry line, I have to pick up every single piece of paper, put it into a binder, write up a report on it. I sign off on it. My manager signs off on it. They send it up to the medical director, and then we all put them in these binders that sit on shelves for years, right? It's crazy, but this is just the way that it's done. Okay, so we built a company basically to address this issue, this little low-hanging fruit. Okay, so our product is called lablogs.co. We are officially at market now, so it is available. And our main target are these clinical labs, these guys that have a bunch of different instrumentation, and they're tracking all this all the way down to even kit tests. Our offering addresses that. And we're a cloud-based solution, so we come in and we make the whole process really easy for them as well. So quick little peek at our software. I won't get too far into the weeds, even though I love the product, right? But this is the difference, right? Instead of a paper log, they log in our system. We tell them what it is they need to do, where they're at in the timeline, and they move on. It's really that simple. And it should be that simple, right? But what happens is when you do this for all your instrumentation, you get a lot of benefits you would never get from paper, okay? So there's downtime, for example. If something happens and you need to know about it, we can immediately shoot out an alert to a manager or coordinator, whoever. If something's overdue, we tell you, right? So you're not stuck backfilling logs later in the week or in the month. So there's a lot of big advantages there. And then what happens, especially powerful for these users, is the reporting now is all there, right? It's all electronic. So whereas now you get audited and they're thumbing through, looking through binders, proving, yeah, I did this on that date, et cetera. We literally, with a click of a mouse, export the reports the auditors need in seconds. Okay, so huge advancement for them. And honestly, we really are quite proud of it. It's pretty cool. We're honestly also blown away that nobody's really already done this. So quick look at our timeline as a company. We're still really young. Okay, so in 2019 is when we went to beta. We spent some time before that building out the product. But in 2019, we went to beta in New York. That was one of the partner, Jeremy Sikorsky was the guy who brought this idea to me. and he's in he runs a few labs in New York, and we ran it in his New York labs first. And so he stuck his neck out there, and we got all the feedback we needed. So it worked out well, and we were excited, and we went to market and right at the end of 2019. And then, like everybody else, we had no idea COVID was coming. So that was a bit of a risk for us, or a challenge for us rather. But we did land our first sale at the beginning of 2020 to a local hospital network, and they were a 7-lab facility, so another really good test bed for us. And then we also had one more at the end of that year. But this year has been an explosive growth year for us. So we've had a lot of contracts already closed. In the end of this year, we have a whole bunch coming in. So a lot of good growth there. The COVID clouds finally lifted, right? And guys are buying our software again. And there's been great response. So that's a quick look at where we've been. Just to kind of wrap it up, we have like a 3-point, what can you help us with type thing. Our top priorities are we're kind of addressing all of these 3 items right now. We are raising a seed round of $500K, so we're actively looking for investors. I shared with Jacqueline this morning or a few minutes ago, that we actually we're in due diligence for about half of that already. So we're super excited that we've got the ball rolling there, but we're always looking for more. Strategic partners, though, we're really anybody in the lab space and the equipment servicing side of things, even some of the EHR type softwares. We really want to talk to anybody because we're looking for strategic partners to really just scale this thing. We can continue to blow out sales in the way that we're doing it, the slow knocking on the doors, waiting for a 1-year sales cycle. But we really think that the growth is going to come from those channel partners. So we're looking for strategic partnerships in that area, and any kind of conversations with the lab experts, the guys that are either regulatory experts or in the lab actually running tests. We're still learning a lot. Like for example, we had no idea some of the point of care type lab folks that really wanted our product. So there's some stories behind that. But anyway, we're always learning. So any kind of conversations with that, with those type of experts, we'd love to have. So that's really it from our side. I think that is the last slide. So I'll just kind of pause here and open it up for any questions that you guys might have for me.
Awesome. And we've had a couple of other people join us, and we've got some developers in the audience. So I know you might get some really good questions. So I always have them, but I'd like to open it up and see if there's any from our audience.
Okay.
So Jacqueline, this is Lizette. Hi, Daniel. And I'm the executive director for our Association for Providers of Disability Services. And awesome. I'm just curious, I know that the Alaska Hospital Association is a very strong, very active, very professional, a pretty incredible group. And I wonder if that wouldn't be a really good resource, Jacqueline. I don't think there's anybody from the Alaska Hospital Association on this group. And it suddenly strikes me that, maybe we ought to think about that.
That's a great idea. Would that be somebody like Elizabeth King, perhaps? Is that?
There are so many staff people there. I don't know her. I know other staffs, and I know Jared, but he wouldn't be the person. Oh, probably okay. Who would probably be the best link. But okay. I just think it would be really interesting for them to hear a presentation on this across the state.
Awesome. Thank you, Lizette.
Thank you, Lizette. I appreciate that.
So I'll definitely follow up with that. Are there any other questions from the audience or tips? That was a great one from Lizette. Try to top that one.
I had a question. I guess I'm curious, once you aggregate a bunch of this data from lab equipment, is there any key insights that you have found from like either replacement parts or some lab equipment lasting longer than others? Or I guess like what happens to like a bunch of this data in aggregate that is collected from lab equipment?
Yes, it sounds like you're already kind of wearing an investor hat of sorts. I in our investor deck, which that was not, I kind of allude to that. And it's a no-brainer, right? So once you gain footprint and you have a lot of testing results and you see a lot of failures, we can already see trends in like what equipment has the most service reports, what equipment has the most failures. I think there's a lot of value in that. So, you know, it might be that Siemens already knows about their equipment and where it fails, but they may not know about where Nova's does, right? Or GE's, et cetera. So I think there's going to be some value in aggregating that data and monetizing it. I don't know exactly how it's going to best be done. It could even be a potential buyer, right? So you become like a, you know, a recommendation type service. But there's absolutely one of those things that we have been sure to put into our contracts anonymized data rights, and we've had no pushback on that at this point. So
it reminds me a lot of like those Amazon Dash buttons that you press that reorders certain things. I feel like that could be interesting. To automatically reorder parts before they run out.
Well, and actually that's another reason why I'm so interested to have like talks with like manufacturing type companies, like the GEs of the world, the Siemens of the world, because there are a lot of maintenance schedules, reordering of parts, all that kind of stuff. That why not put it into a system like this? You know what I mean? So yeah, absolutely.
Great comments. Thank you, Solomon. Are there any other questions, or we've had a few others join? Yes, Misty.
I'm just curious as to what your future products, like what you have planned for future products.
Yes, so we keep getting tugged at from a few different angles, right? So as soon as we get in there and we show the platform and we show how agnostic it is, as far as it can really work for anything from a big automation line like you saw a picture of, to a kit test, it's just a pregnancy, whatever, to now they're using it for like task lists, right? So they'll have like a third shift task log. They just go through and they just say, yep, I did this. So we're getting a lot of tug in three different areas. Radiology. So radiology does a lot of like the dyes and the vests and all that stuff. They have paper logs to track where that stuff is, and they fight over who had it last, right? And then you have pharmacy has a lot of expiration that they keep up with and on paper. And then the other one that was really surprising me is cafeteria logs. So clinical cafeterias, they're now pushing even more standards as far as like food temperatures, fridge temps, all that kind of stuff. And guess what? They're on paper too, right? So, so they're all three like no-brainer next market segments that we could address. The challenge for me as a young company who's like cash is king type thing is like keep your eye on the ball and get there, but don't lose sight of those other potential opportunities. And I think that's the challenge with all the startups, but there are absolutely some opportunities in there. And what we all probably know is once you're in a hospital system, it's a whole lot easier to cross sell than to come in new, right? So we're betaing, we are going to beta some of those use cases with our clients that are really pushing for it and asking for it in hopes that later we'll be able to cross sell to the existing client base.
Have you considered looking into like the military? The reason I'm asking because I'm a mil spouse. So, you know, the military, they have labs and they send their stuff off. So boy, would it be nice if their stuff was streamlined. Yeah,
exactly. We did. So early on, we actually looked at some like VA hospital labs, and the challenges there, there's a lot of requirements you have to have as far as even funding. So they're not just going to let a new startup come in, and you have to be able to say, hey, I can handle all of you. So we're not quite there yet, but that's an obvious no-brainer, and I'd love to have those big contracts, right? So, but yeah, it's absolutely applicable there for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Misty. And then I see Jake has his hand up. Jake, do you have a question?
I do, thank you. First of all, hi, I'm Jake Carpenter. I am a software developer and entrepreneur myself. So Daniel, my question actually, you know, I think you touched on a few minutes ago when you were talking about, you know, your sales cycle being interrupted by COVID, but I'd be interested in hearing more about that, as, you know, how you know, how receptive are these healthcare organizations to new tech? You know, do you feel like COVID sort of renewed their interest in streamlining, or are they reaching out to you sort of as a necessity? You know, what's spurring those conversations, and how do you see, you know, frankly, I think this is interesting to a lot of the health tie companies, is what does this sales outlook look like for these organizations, and what's your general sense on where we're headed?
Yeah, so you know, so there's a couple questions there. I'll try and address them all, but you know, we're still trying to like decipher what of these long sales cycles, for example. Some of them have been over a year. Like we just high-fived over a big contract, but it took us over a year to get it. Was that because of COVID, or was that just the way healthcare is? In a lot of ways, we found that healthcare is just that slow. You know, your top priority and you're still 6 months out. You know, it's like, it's just the way it is, unfortunately. So you have to be able to live out those long sales cycles and all that. But we absolutely were, initially we were halted by COVID in that people wanted it, but they weren't allowed to buy it, right? So, but what's happened now is CAP, for example. CAP is an accrediting body that you can be accredited by in the lab. It's kind of a step above CLIA accreditation. And they have now moved to a dual, it used to be a fully on-site audit, and now they're a dual. So they do their first step is a virtual, scan your logs and send them to us, and we're going to look at them, and then we'll do an on-site. Well, guess what? Our first customer that I've mentioned here locally, they're CAP accredited. And so when CAP said, hey, send me your stuff, they clicked export and they sent it over to them. They're like, whoa. And so they were absolutely blown away, and it was awesome. And when they were marked for a deficiency, their deficiency response was put into our software. So they were missing an expiration on a reagent or whatever. So they're like, that's cool. We'll put it in as a task in L. So they put it in, they recorded it for a week, and they sent the export of that to them. So those type of things are becoming more automated. It's becoming more accepted. Plus, we're riding on the heels of, you know, the EHRs of the world. It used to be that people like pushed back on electronic data, and now it's a no-brainer. Like everybody gets it. So we come in and we have a huge advantage in that regard, is that you don't really have to sell the idea that much. You come in and they're like, oh, an electronic solution, duh, right? So they get it immediately. Now it's like, can they afford it? Is the timing right? Those are really the two check marks that we have to address on that regard.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions from the audience at all? I see there's a lot of, we're a small group, but we're very powerful. There's a lot of good brains on this call right now. Any other questions? So maybe I'll jump in with one of my own, Daniel. One thing I'm really curious about is, you know, let's say that we were able to find an Alaskan lab who really finds this a pain point and is willing to talk to you. What kind of conditions make it useful for you to meet with that client, and what do you look for partnering?
Yeah. So I mean, we're happy to work with. We're eager for any clients at this point. Again, a lot of that's because we're also trying to figure out where our best, you know, market fit is. So we've even gone to, I alluded to this in my presentation, we've even gone to like a per user pricing model on some of these sites. So like your smaller site, initially I was like, man, I do not want to mess with little $2,000 contracts. It's not worth our time and effort. But guess what? We found out they onboard in a week and they close in a month. So whereas it's like, you know, you've got these 1 year sales cycles and they have a 3-month implementation and on and on and on. So we're like, oh man, so maybe we need to get these more attention, right? So anyway, all that to say, we're happy to work with any size facility, and there's usually a pricing model that will work. Most of our clients, we've never stepped foot in their lab. as again, because of COVID, that's become acceptable, right? So we thought we'd have a lot of travel fees, a lot of all that. Well, everything's virtual now. So it makes it easy for us to do some virtual screenings, do some virtual demos, all that kind of stuff. And then our onboarding is also virtual. So we're happy to have those conversations, honestly, with a lab of any size. And if it fits, it fits. If it doesn't, it's really no problem. We're not offended by that at all. We get it. Timing's everything in these labs or in these hospital systems, period. So we get it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So one thing that you and I were speaking about earlier is just kind of you're raising a seed round, and some people here have some deep familiarity with kind of startup life and getting investments, but maybe you could give us a brief understanding of where you're taking that and what you're looking for investment partners.
Sure. Yeah. So we've honestly, right now, the most traction we found are with angel investors at this point. I mean, a lot of the VC funds are looking for very specific ARR goals, and no brainer, just throw the money in and it'll grow. We're still very young, right? So we are raising a $500,000 seed round. It is a priced round, so we're pricing at $3 million pre, and we have a little over half of that full now. So we're, hoping to fill it out completely. But we need that money to scale appropriately. Okay. So we're, sales and marketing side of things is where the majority of that money is going to go. The product as a whole is pretty stable, but there's always constant growth there. Most of the money is going to be on the sales and marketing side. There were a lot of trade shows we couldn't go to recently, right? Now we can. There's a lot of like marketing channels and NLOs of the world and that sort of thing that we're also going to be getting in front of and trying to work those channels. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So, anybody who has any additional contacts for Daniel, please put those in the chat. And I'm just going to give you last minute, Daniel, to wrap up. And then you're welcome to stay while we kind of talk about the development of HealthTie. But I just want to really thank you for your time today. I love the problem that you're solving. And I was telling you this right before we got on. What I love is it kind of takes a particular problem that most of us probably wouldn't see and then moves it forward to actually finding a solution. And what I'm finding in my work in HealthTie is that those exist everywhere, all over healthcare. And so even though it's really surprising that many of these sophisticated labs are using pen and paper to track all their maintenance, I don't think it's unique. And so I'm just going to invite everybody who's on this call who might have some of those areas to, think about Daniel and electronic lab logs as an example. So I'll turn it back over to you to kind of wrap us up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I really do appreciate the invite. I just appreciate these conversations too. Even if it's just one little thought that comes out of these, they're always worth something. So really, thank you for having me. Obviously, you can feel free to reach out directly. Our website is just lablogs.co. It's not .com, lablogs.co. And my email address is just daniel@lablogs.co. So love to talk with any of you, whether it's just chatting about it or you have some specific interest. Totally fine either way, but thanks for having me. I'll stick around for the rest